This week on the Old School RuneScape update, we look back at the year that was for 2024. We discuss quests, skill updates, and combat encounters, while also reflecting on how the game is doing compared to a year ago, and where we're at and where we're headed. This is the Old School RuneScape update, episode 60, recorded Saturday, December 21st, 2024. Old School's 2024 in review. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Old School RuneScape update. Sirion and myself are here for the last regularly scheduled episode of this year. And I guess I'll say this up front rather than at the end of the show in case people tune out by then. But we do have I think we said we do have 2 weeks off, and we're back for the update following the 15th of January, because you're on vacation for the first couple weeks of the new year.
Yep.
So you can expect to hear the first episode back of OSRS Update in 2025 on the 19th. But what we're going to do today, it's time to sit back, relax, and look at the year that was in both OSRS and the OSRS Update. We weren't able to do one of these last year. You looking forward to this one?
Yeah, I think it's good. Like it it doesn't feel like a whole year has actually passed.
No.
But, here we are.
No, indeed. And what we're going to do here is we got a number of sections that we've put out, and we're going to just discuss different pieces of content in each one. So we're going to start off with something near and dear to our hearts. What is quest of the year for each of us? And this is the new quest that came out this year. So start us off. What's yours?
This is an interesting one. It felt like there weren't actually that many quests to choose from this year. Now, were there?
No, it certainly feels like that.
But yeah, I ended up going for the one where I had the most fun, and I feel it's the most RuneScapey one, which is the riveting toe of a lily pad lady. I mean, the fact that you just erupted in laughter, that to me says enough about the fact that this quest exists. It's that good, right? It's just that good. It just works.
Yeah. This is something, and this is one of the joys that comes with Old School, is that very seldomly on the RS3 side do we get quests like this that are just, one-off, that are just absolutely, at this point, just not taking themselves seriously, making fun of a specific thing in the real world, but doing it in such a way in the game that you don't care what they're making fun of, because in this case it was frogs having a union dispute.
Yep.
And
exactly.
My favorite part of this quest was the accidental assassination.
Yes. No, it like the whole thing is just full of British humor. It's so incredibly deadpan throughout, and that to me really sold it. And the fact that it came as such a surprise, right? Like they hadn't really announced this quest, so we hadn't really expected it. That to me really sold it as, an amazing thing. So that's my quest of the year. I know we had things like bigger quests. I will not spoil yours. But I don't know. They just didn't feel like they worked for me. So and this one did. So, I hope we get a few more quests next year. Maybe a Grandmaster. We didn't get one last year, but yeah.
But we did get a Grandmaster quest this past year. I'll say that, when it comes to the riveting tale, it set the benchmark for what I was expecting in Varlamore Batch 2, and that's why none of the Varlamore Batch 2 quests are in my quest of the year. And the quest that I have as quest of the year is actually a Grandmaster quest, and that is the fact that we got Well Gothic Sleeps in the game. And I know,
Yeah.
that setting that silence out means that, of course, there was a huge discussion in the community about whether or not aspects of this quest hit the spot. And I think we were in an interesting position, and I say we by you and myself, because I think it was not even a month before While Gothic Sleeps came out that you and I did Song of the Elves, which set the benchmark for what we, began to see as modern OSRS Grandmaster quests. But I had to put Quest of the Year, While Gothic Sleeps, in here because for a couple of reasons. The first one is it was the first ever Grandmaster quest in all of RuneScape. Reason number one. And reason number two is that following the separate arc, the Stone of Jazz arc, in the whole Majorat thing that Old School is doing, While Gothic Sleeps, Defender of Iraq, those backported quests that we got this year, and Curse of Arav, the most recent one, do form an integral path on that way. And I think these quests are necessary to have in the game to, in effect, figure out where that arm of the Majorat storyline is going to go in the future.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think the whole thing is a little bit too rooted in sentimentality. And I think that's why it was hyped up so much.
Yeah.
And it just didn't deliver because it just doesn't compare. And, if you happen to be really into Majorat and that storyline, then I can see why you might still like it. And the stone. But, like, that's not the part of the lore that I'm super interested in.
Right. And this goes to the survey in terms of what we talked about on the survey show last week, is that one of the quest lines I said I'd like to see continued the most, of course, is the Majorat stuff. So there we go.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Skilling update of the year. These can be good or bad when we're putting them in here, by the way, folks.
Yeah, I went with Hunter Rumors. I think, they changed the way we look at Hunter. I think Hunter was always a skill that people avoided by just doing birdhouses. And this really, I think, reopened everybody's eyes to the existence of the rest of the skill, I guess.
Yeah, because who does falconry, right?
Exactly, but like you actually did start doing it again as part of the Hunter Rumors, and I think that's a very good way of sort of reusing all of the existing content and making it relevant again. So in that respect, I think it's a very smart update. I think it has exposed quality of life issues with Hunter.
Yeah.
And I hope we will still see those fixed. But at least there's now a reason for Hunter methods to be sort of fixed and improved again, as opposed to before where it wasn't really worth it because, let's be honest, nobody was actually doing them. So for me, Hunter Rumors, it bothers me a little bit that it pushes more skills in the direction of Slayer, I suppose. But I don't know. In this case, it works. It works.
Yeah, and I think that Hunter Rumors itself gave life to that entire southern part of Varlamore, Part 1, just south of the city there, and we have to give it credit for that. And also, with that, for anybody who took Varlamore in leagues, you probably wanted to take Animal Wrangler to get through the Varlamore hunter tasks on that. So you start to see all these different synergies there about Hunter Rumors and what's that's done. Personally, Hunter has never been my skill, and Slayer has never been my skills, so Hunter Rumors really didn't help me. I did a few of them on launch and then, kind of just went back to the birdhouses for that. But it is I think if it does one thing in particular, in addition to providing a different way of training Hunter, it's to like you said, shine that light that quality of life is needed. Now, my skilling update of the year is also a Varlamore piece of content, and went through the list for this and looked, and I thought, we could have put something in there like Guardians of the Rift changes, like Wintertodt changes as a skilling update of the year. But I thought I'm going to go with an actual piece of skilling content that's new to the game this year, and I'm putting in Mastering Mixology. And I know that when it came out, it was a little bit off in terms of the numbers and the amount of points that you would get, and in general, the potion tiering was a bit out of whack too. But they fixed that, and it wasn't anything structural wrong with that. It was just numbers and balancing. And the thing I think is most interesting about this is, first and foremost, is that if you look at any other MMO out there and you talk about potions or things like alchemy, that's what Mastering Mixology is, and it brings that angle to Herblore, which I think is pretty neat. And then the other aspect of it that is the thing people are going to be jumping up and down about is, of course, the rewards, like potion stores, the potion chugger, the outfit, and whatnot. I think the reward suite that came from Mastering Mixology was definitely a shining star of Varlamore Part 2.
It's interesting because I think the potion storage, it was sort of considered like the major selling point, but there's also a lot of people who dislike how it works, and
yeah.
So I think it's a controversial one. I think that's the best way of putting it. It's a controversial one, but I've been I happen to have been doing Mastering Mixology all afternoon on leagues today, and it's fine. It works.
Yeah, and the question is then are you going to feel burnt out on it when you go back to Mainscape and you have to do it eventually?
We'll see about that.
All right. Combat and PVM updates of the year. There was no dancing around this one. This was one of our breakout moments this year on OSRS update. Combat rebalances, and in particular Project rebalance with elemental weaknesses. That was huge.
Yeah, I agree. We got elemental weaknesses, which I don't know if they really did all they needed.
Oh, you think they could have went further?
Yeah, maybe. Is elemental magic now really the meta? And I don't know. I definitely think it changes the mid game a lot.
It does. It does.
I think that's good. At the same time, I don't know if they've really addressed the issue. And with Project Rebalance in general, there are areas where I wonder, did they go far enough? And I don't know what the answer is to that.
One thing I think you look at that and you say maybe they could have went further. But I think a thing that it did really well was that there's now a very compelling reason, even if you have Ancients unlocked, to use the standard spellbook.
I will grant you that, yes.
Because if a creature has elemental weakness, go and use that. And, I actually, early on in my League's adventure this year, prior to having the accuracy passive, went to the Steel Dragons to get my Rune-Eyed Limbs. And I took Mystic, and it was a boatload easier than it was interacting with those dragons before Elemental Weakness came out. And yeah, I'm mentioning Leagues, but I don't have any Magic masteries, and it was only the first ammunition saving one that I had. So power wise, I was pretty much on tier with where I would have been in the main game, and it was definitely very noticeable. So I think elemental weaknesses is good to have there. And I know there's been a lot of community friction about that, and in general things related to Project Rebalance. And one of the early updates that we covered this year, and I think if we're going to say one thing in terms of how this charts a course for Jagex, is that this year's combat and PVM updates with the exception of the Colosseum, have been largely beginner to mid-level focused. And we start there with Scurious. That came out early this year.
Yeah, I don't know what to think of Scurious, to be honest. I find it really hard. I want to like it so much.
Hard?
Hard. I mean, I find it hard to talk about.
Oh, okay, fair.
I mean, hard. I mean, I still struggle with the boss a little bit. I'm gonna be honest. Which, I mean, it sounds silly, I know, but it feels a little bit random, the boss, especially at the level where you are supposed to fight it. It all feels
60 to 80.
Exactly. It feels like I had to consume more of my resources than I would get out of it.
Yeah, and that's fair because I've seen stories of people in the 80s to 99s just slaughtering the thing. So
exactly, and in leagues as well. I just I poke it and it dies, but this is not necessarily the case. This just doesn't happen to be the case at the level where you're supposed to do it. It's not necessarily punishing, but it feels like there's a little bit too much randomness involved.
Yeah, I get that. I
don't know. Like on my main account, I just don't feel inclined to go there.
Yeah, and I'm in the same situation. We'll see where we're at after leagues because I think I'm approaching the level where I might be able to do it effectively. But I think the thing that, and the reason I wanted to put this here was because it's a perfect prayer training boss in terms of prayer flicking, learning how to do that for different combat styles. And one of the setups you can definitely take to Scurious is you could just max out your prayer bonus if you want to, and if you do everything right, you're not going to need the other forms of defense there. But I know there has always been a conversation this year about too much, beginner to mid-level stuff, but one of the big quests that came with Varlamore Part 1 was Perilous Moons and that boss encounter, which I know which I'm going to let you take away, because I think you feel better about that than you do Scurious.
Yeah, like I was like when Scurious came out, I was a little bit worried about this boss. Like, am I actually, is it me, right? Is it the me problem? Am I just really that bad at PVM? And maybe. But again, I think Moons of Power was something that maybe initially they didn't get quite right.
Yeah, there were a few bugs on launch week.
Well, not necessarily bugs, but also like the balance, especially around the Blood Moon healing.
Okay.
I think there were a little bit, there were questions asked about that, and they had to tweak that quite significantly. But I think it's now at a point where I really enjoy doing the boss, and I guess what it's taught me about myself is that I like movement-related mechanics more than I like prayer switching related.
I just said whoa because movement mechanics, and I thought this was primarily an old school thing for me, that I was having issue with movement mechanics and things like the moons and a few quest bosses we did. But I also learned this year that when RS3 puts out its movement intensive boss, I have problems there too. So it's just movement in all things RuneScape for me. So
it's a skill issue basically.
No. It is asking you to interact with movement on a game that has a 0.6 second tick, and you need to really get your brain thinking in such a pattern to do that effectively. Yeah. And we can go back and forth until summer solstice. It's winter solstice right now. We can go back and forth until the summer solstice if we want to about the various aspects of movement in PVM, because that's I think something that needs to be addressed in both games, I'll say. So
yeah, maybe like I said, I really find it I think some of the mechanics are my favorite PvM mechanics in the game right now. Like, I love the clone phase of the Eclipse Moon. Unfortunately, that boss is then taken down with the stupid ball that you need to stay behind mechanic.
You're right.
That's my least favorite mechanic from all of the moons. So it balances out. But no, I think they did a really good job. I love the lore around it. I love the dungeon. It really does feel like what would Barrows look like if they built it in 2024, and they knocked it out of the what do you say?
Knocked it out of the park.
Knocked it out of the park.
The
There
baseball
you go.
reference.
Yes.
Yeah,
and in leagues, what I can see a lot, and this is the amazing thing. I think a lot of people didn't really spend a lot of time there in the main game because it's not best in slot, the armor you get from there.
Which
however,
I find weird because the melee stuff competes with Bandos.
Exactly, and well, it doesn't compete with Torva.
Fair.
And that's the thing you need to compare it to. But looking around at leagues, and I think a lot of people that went for the melee build went for Valimor and went with the full Blood Moon set. And as someone who has that, I can tell you it's a lot of fun. Where Magic might be about big hit splats. I think the melee build with the Blood Moon is just hit splats.
Yeah, and the other choice for melee is, of course, big numbers with like Darox.
Exactly. So it's amazing to see that there are like multiple viable ways, and this is one of them. The one thing that I will say though is that I haven't really seen a lot of people using the blue and the Eclipse Moon sets.
Yeah.
I don't think they came out as well, but all in all, still a really fun encounter.
And that was one of my alternate leagues builds I was going to do, is I was going to go Magic, and I was going to get take Varlamore as a region and go for use the Blue Moon armor. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But I haven't gone back to the moon since the quest. I did a kill after the quest. A real kill on that, and I will agree with you that it's a superbly designed encounter. The armor and everything associated with it is great. So even though I don't do that much PVM with it, I still think it's a good piece of content for the year.
It also just set up a completely new chapter of PVM, like a Moxliado and with the dual glacial hammers. Torex hammers, the fact that there's now sort of two ways to think about, because of the flat armor bonus possibly being negative, to me has transformed especially melee combat in the game significantly, and that for me makes it the update. It makes it the update of the year because I think even if the encounter itself, there will be other content over time, I think it has been transformative and has changed combat forever.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. And then with that, we move to quality of life. And this one, of course, is for me the farming update involved in this, and that is the barbarian seed planting, using your finger as a seed dibber. And, this goes back to my eternal debate that I always say with Old School. Where's the tool belt? Where's the tool belt? I know that might be sacrilege to, some people out there listening, but it is something I would like to have in the game. And that's why when it comes to things like the barbarian seed planting with your fingers, I thought, yes, okay, if I can't have a tool belt, I'll at least take this. And, it was a 5 to 10 minute unlock, and I have it now.
Yeah, I think it's good. I like it. I like being able to smash my pots. Interestingly, I feel that in leagues, I don't know, you can maybe tell me, or you might have done the barbarian training on leagues. But I am still smashing all of my vials when drinking them on leagues. And I think that's because I might have unlocked it last time I played leagues.
That's interesting. That is very interesting. I have not done that part of barbarian training yet, so I have no idea on that.
It's because I think it turns into an account setting once you have it unlocked, maybe, and maybe that just makes it a permanent thing, which I think is interesting. So I don't know. Anyway, just a little
That
side
that
note there.
that is odd. That is odd. Huh. All right. For you, quality of life update of the year.
Oh, Mage Training Arena changes big time.
Have you gone back since they added these in?
Yes,
Okay.
I got my bones to peaches since they
Okay.
added this in.
Okay. So it's not as painful.
It's fine, not fun, but fine. Um, I think in RS3 we have Livid Farm, which is a
Oh
grind that
my
a lot of
god.
people really hate.
Uh-huh.
And there was a clanmate that at some point had the best quote describing it, and I think Mage Training Arena has the same. One does not enjoy Mage Training Arena. One endures it. And I think the changes they made this year made it a lot more endurable.
It was in my last 3 comp requirements on RS3. And that's what I'll
Yeah,
say.
no.
So,
Look, I'm looking at it. I'm like, I should really be getting a full Infinity set because that's a lot of points in leagues. But
yeah, no, I'm not. I had that same conversation with myself. There's content that I don't want to do. I'm not going to put myself through it in leagues. And Mage
yeah,
Training Arena
fair.
is one of those. Just like Barbarian Assault. Amongst other things. But no, I get that. And I think it's important that they do that because this is before these changes, an absolute aged piece of content that needed to be brought up for 2024, especially given, like you were mentioning, the place where Infinity Armor and Boots sits. So, all right. Now, with looking at the past year's update, that brings us to a point where we're able to ask, where is Old School RuneScape versus a year ago? And how did all of that impact the previous discussions that we've just had, if at all? And I think it's quite clear what Jagex is trying to do here. If I'm going to be honest, and you tell me what you think of this framing. I think they're trying to modernize Old School RuneScape in a way that still keeps its charm, keeps its look and feel, and keeps the reward for trudging through content that is long and perceived to be difficult at the start. So you still get that sense of accomplishment that you would have had back in 2007, from which the game is based.
Yeah, that lines up, or that's a similar thing as what I was going to say. Like, if you look at the trend of updates, both like Varlamore and the PVM updates, and some of the things that are still coming, it almost seems like we're not really pushing the envelope with ever more Grandmaster quests, even harder quest requirements, even bigger grinds, even
More
higher.
raids.
More raids, higher content, and I think that's it is leading to some grumbling in the community, and I get it. Like, a lot of people have passed this point of the mid game already, but I do think it is valuable, and I think what we see now. And I think Leagues has sort of cemented this for me, and I'm hoping that more people will see it this way after going through these regions in Leagues. I think the journey from early game to late game has become much more enjoyable. It's become much less about try to get through it as fast as possible,
Yeah.
to actually being able to enjoy it, having meaningful choice and actual meaningful content to do, and a bunch of fun PVM encounters that you don't you I feel you no longer need to get to max gear and push for like the Inferno to have fun with the game and the PVM anymore. Like, that's really a big transformation that the game has made this year.
Yeah, I'll second that in particular because of all the gear that we got that was, player craftable, like the Huey armor as an example, the Blood Moon stuff that drops at, a decent rate to the point it's affordable for mid-level players just beyond Barrow's gear. So all that definitely lines up on the combat side. And I think they also... Go ahead.
Like in general, just I think there's just more enjoyable ways of getting to things. Like you said, you can now actually grind some of this gear out at reasonable pace. But also, combat training was always just park yourself at
crabs.
Park yourself at crabs, park yourself in a nightmare zone. Now, Scurious is an actual viable alternative.
Yeah. And you know what? Another thing with this is you can take that exact same thing to skilling too, in terms of, looking at the level 60 band. And I mentioned level 60 for two specific reasons. First one is mastering mixology, which we talked about. And then the next one is Varlamore thieving. Because previously your thieving options were what? Pyramid plunder? Artifacts at the Piscarelius area? Repeated pickpocketing?
The fact that Varlamore thieving was not the skilling update of the year for either of us is actually quite baffling.
And see, here's the thing, is that I felt like mastering mixology was more dynamic than Varlamore thieving.
Sure.
So that's why I didn't put that there. But all of this lines up with exactly what you were saying on the combat and PVM side. And then you also have the stuff on the technical side that Jagex is doing with that too, where you have things like upcoming HD graphics mode, the mobile client changes, and what I'll say overall is just a push to add more quality of life related things. Because look, Old School got a tremendous influx of players around this time last year and in the start of the new year, when it became clear that the RS3 side was going to be having a huge content drought for the first quarter and a bit of the year. Hence why most of my time in the first quarter was spent on Old School. And I think if we go back in the DMs, and I'm not encouraging you to do this right now in our DMs, you'll see that I complained to you a lot about Old School content at that time.
Yeah.
And I think if you can remove those pain points, you can remove those friction points without using microtransactions and good content instead, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting that they are investing in this, but also in things like making the client better and adding better graphics and all of that. It's almost as if they are trying to gear up for a sort of a second phase of new player acquisition.
Yeah, and that's going to be just so difficult because it's difficult to start an MMO, let alone bring players into an existing MMO at this point in time. So I wish them luck with that. Okay. Now that's a lot about content and a lot about what Jagex was doing. The community. The community.
Yes.
We picked this community moment with no questions asked. No questions asked. And this was the entire debate about Rathma into Sandma, and then let's just put this content on the shelf again.
Yeah. I don't know what to think of it still.
It went down because it was purely PvP related initially.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this, and I talked about why I think it is good, and then people disagreed with me and gave me some reasons. And really, I think what it came down to me in the end is that it's not really PvP that players want. It is.
Come on, be spicy. It's the last episode of the year.
It's really what people want is more reasons for helpless noobs to go into the wilderness so they can be slaughtered by toxic PKs.
There you go. There you
Like
go.
that's what it. That's and really that's I think, and that's why I think that is why PvP is such a heavily emotionally debated thing, right? Because
I remember the comment that
on
said
the
that you were having skill issues about this.
oh, I mean, sure I do, but like um like I think there's just this disconnect, right? Where there are just people that really just want that need other players to be there to be killed. And ideally those players, I don't know, I hope this isn't true, but I think it is true. I think most of the existing PKers would rather have people come into the wilderness that don't know how to PK. Because what's the fun is if everybody starts fighting back. I think.
And there
the
were
fun goes
aspects of
away really
Wrathmaw
quickly.
that allowed that to happen.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. It's like people want different things out of the wilderness. I think, and one of them is preying on the other and kind of wanting the other. Like it's basically luring people into the wilderness on a meta level. That's what's happening. So, and then people are like, but actually, we don't want to go into the wilderness. Stop giving us wilderness content. And then the community that does want wilderness content gets upset because, hey, why do you not want to go literally into a slaughterhouse where you get killed all the bloody time because it's a complicated special meta that is completely disconnected from the rest?
Yeah. And we have sandboxes that enable that. And I think one of the interesting things that I picked up through leagues here this year is that the wilderness is not the least popular region, and there's lots of actual interesting content in the wilderness that I'd like to play with, that if I was doing leagues again this year, I might consider choosing the wilderness. Now, granted, yeah, you can still be PK'd in leagues wilderness, but you don't lose your stuff. And I think that adds an interesting element to it when you look at all the content that's there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I wish I could go into the wilderness and do some of the. I would love to try out some of the wilderness bosses like Scorpia and all of that. I think there's potentially something interesting there. I'm just put off by the whole PKing situation. I think that's unfortunate, and I don't think that will ever change.
Yeah, and I mean, I lasted 35 minutes when we got the wilderness agility course changes, and that was that.
Yeah.
And that was
so I don't know. Like, if there was really such a high demand for proper structured PvP, I would expect things like Bounty Hunter and Castle Wars to be way more popular. And I know that they have their communities that are super active there, and we're seeing some upcoming castle changes. So I don't want to trivialize that. But
no, but the thing is, I was just gonna say, I don't PvP in RS. But I have PvP'd in another game before, to the point where I ran one of the largest PvP clans or guilds, and I understand why people don't like the ordered nature of it. And it's exactly what you say. It's use whatever tools I have to express my skill on people who maybe don't have that sort of skill.
Yeah.
So
yeah, all in all, I don't know. Like, for me, it was also the community moment because, besides the discussion, I think it's a valid discussion to have, right? I want to highlight that. I think it's a valid discussion to have. And I think as a community, we can and should think about what do we actually want the wilderness to be for us. And I think we ended up getting that through a survey, and we haven't really heard anything since. So maybe that's information by itself. But what really surprised me was the level of misinformation and the level of shade being thrown back and forth.
On the internet? No.
So yeah, anyway. I'm getting, my heart rate is getting too high. Let's move on to the next topic.
Getting into our favorite things we did this year, including, as we started off earlier in the show, quests. I'm going to let you go first here.
I'm gonna pick one that might be a surprise to some people, but it's Beneath Cursed Sands. There are parts of the quest maybe not a massive fan of. One of the bosses is a little bit annoying, but I think
The
the area
Targala
really.
boss.
Yes. But the area looks gorgeous. The necropolis. Absolutely lovely area. I also really like the lore and where it's going with a mascot. So all in all, it was just really fun. It showed what a modern quest could look like to me in all its glory.
All right. Fair enough. Fair enough.
And now I really want the sequel to this.
Yeah, okay. I can see that. I can see that specifically from the lore point. And, people might not be aware of this.
Well, lore, and also because it opens Menethos.
Yeah, right. And, people might not realize this. We don't mention it week by week, but we are part of Clan Quest, and questing is what got me into Old School. So it's fair that, when it comes to the favorite quest we did, I'm very pleased that yours is about lore and whatnot. And I don't have one on the list because I am still deciding up to this moment, but it's a fork in the road moment, and I need to pick one. I need to pick one from what we did. And I have to go with Secrets of the North. The other choice, by the way, was Song of the Elves.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like when it comes to what I like in RuneScape story, how I started out all those years ago, first hearing about Zaros and the Dig Site quest and subsequent quests like that, and Desert Treasure, what have you, the Ghostly Robes mini quests, all those sorts of things. That's always been a point of interest and intrigue for me. And Secrets of the North does that same sort of thing, lining up to whatever Old School's version of Ritual of the Majorat is going to be at some point when the two Majorat arms of the quest lines come together in the game in the future. And another thing I think that I like seeing in Secrets of the North is that I had always been a fan of Devious Minds from back when it was its own standalone quest.
Mm-hmm.
And I was shocked and surprised when I saw that one of the requirements for completing Secrets of the North was Devious Minds. And, I went into that quest without spoilers. I didn't know what was going to happen. And, seeing the assassin come back with the bow sword and what have you, it's like, oh, that's exactly what I was thinking, back when Devious Minds came out in December 2005. 19 years ago at this point, December 19th, 2005, Devious Minds came out. I was always thinking about that, about what is this assassin about? And lo and behold, we finally get that answer with that, of course, Devious Mind tie into the Temple Knights and Majorat. So as fun as the light puzzles were in Song of the Elves and gaining access to Prif and seeing how that storyline went, I have to pick Secrets of the North.
That's fair. I like the boss. That's probably not why you picked it.
No.
100%
lore and story for me.
Yeah, that's fair enough. One thing I do think I want to highlight about Song of the Elves is I think it is worth mentioning that I think Song of the Elves played, at least for you, a big factor in actually giving Old School a chance. Because I think our first exposure to what was actually happening on the Old School side of the fence was when we got a little bit lost at RuneFest and walked into the Old School keynote, and they announced, Warding and Song of the Elves, and we were like, because
both
we came
pieces
fresh
of content we'd like.
Because we came fresh out of our own RS3 keynote, and I think that was a little bit disappointing that year compared to, literally the elf finale on a whole new skill, I suppose. So
I was ready to sign up after that RuneFest if Warding was going to come out, but then I saw that Warding didn't, and well, I just kind of left it until there was a different opportunity there for that.
So I think it's worth mentioning. So for me, finishing that quest, it was definitely a moment in this year. Finishing that, getting access to Priv, is definitely a milestone, and maybe even more so than in RS3. If I
don't know. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it's a bigger milestone in RS3.
I see what you mean, but I feel that it's been artificially made into a milestone in RS3, whereas in Old School it feels a little bit more natural and fluid.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. And I just want to say my issues with Secrets of the North and the Phantom Muspa were entirely because I thought I would devise my own strategies in there rather than reading what the wiki said and just bringing the Sapphire Bolts there. As soon as we added Sapphire Bolts to the equation, everything was fine.
I don't know if I used them, but yeah.
Okay. Well, how'd you take down Shield Face? You just pray through it, or?
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Just brute force it.
All right. Favorite thing we did?
Well, you can start because I've been starting all episode.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. And, you know, I think when it comes down to it for me, mine's going to be a little bit more mundane than yours is, and mine is probably going to be unlocking all the requirements for Questcape. There were a few that were kind of annoying out there, and I'm mainly, you know, talking about Slayer, of course. I'm very grateful that we had Varlamore thieving to streamline that part of the process, but for the longest time, Slayer was the thing that was the last one that was holding me back, and finally got through it, and, you know, figured out which Slayer Master I should have been using and which one I preferred to use, and I ended up using the Gnome Slayer Master for most of my Slayer stuff, Slayer point stuff to level 69 Slayer. What did you use?
Yeah, I used Neve most of the time.
Okay.
Except for the milestone tasks, which I would always do Konar to get the little boost in points.
Yeah, okay, that's fair.
So what I did is I first point boosted, so that was Konar every milestone task, and like a really low level one. I forgot the name.
The Berthorpe one.
The Berthorpe one, yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, the Berthorpe one, and then just try and boost through tasks that way. Until I had the Slayer helmet unlocked, until I had bigger and badder unlocked, and brought bolts. And then I actually started doing tasks for the experience.
Yeah. And you know the interesting thing, looking at the list of requirements for Questcape, in hindsight, they're not actually that difficult, except for Slayer.
Yeah.
And maybe the magic one, but there's other ways of doing that. But I feel like we know what yours is based on what we've talked about so far.
Is it? For me, the realization came when doing the survey, which is to the point where, I mean, my top thing, like, what do you want as update next year, was a quest, obviously, a Grandmaster quest. Yes, please. Please no port, like an actual Grandmaster quest. But the second thing was a new boss, and I looked at that and was like, what's happened to you?
Wow.
What's happened to you? And honestly, I think the biggest shift happened around the time that both the Moons of Peril were released, and me figuring out the mechanics of that, as well as getting the Fire Cape. Because in RS3, the way I got the Fire Cape is a little bit cheesy. Is I used a Death Touch dart. So if you don't know what it is, it's a special kind of weapon. You can get it. I mean, there's like a million ways to get it right now, but back in the day they were quite rare. You could get them for special promotions, and they're basically a one-use dart that can instantly kill a monster.
I see no
So,
problem with that.
I used that on Dart, on Jad. I used the Dart on Jad because I was like, I'm not gonna do 45 minutes of fight case and then die because I can't pray.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I've
And
never
that's
done
not
fight...
your fault, because it is incumbent on you in Old School to figure out your way around the UI and getting to that prayer menu. Whatever works best for you, whether that be moving your mouse and clicking the button, whether it be pressing a button on your keyboard to pull it up, or binding that button to something on your mouse.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, like there was that, and there was, I did do fight kiln, which is, I guess, like the Inferno. No, it's not the Inferno. It's much easier. It's like in between the.
We don't have
the
anything
fight
on RS3 that I'd say is infernal difficulty.
No, exactly. So it's like a step up from fight case. And I did do that, and you have to kill like double Jad in that and a few Jads. So I had done Jad since, but still never in the Old School setting, and still never in the fight case. So it ended up taking me, I think, like 3 tries in the end. But the level, like the feeling of accomplishment out of doing this legit was like, it's intoxicating, I think is the best way to put it. And then being able to learn how to flinch the Jaguars and the Blood Moon. And then in leagues, figuring out the Echo Hespori, which I think it's a fairly easy boss, but if you had put me in that arena last year in leagues, I would have died so hard. And just the progression I've seen in myself, and the ability I now have in dealing with some pretty complicated mechanics, both with the Echo Hespori and lately with the Echo Coalfight Queen, has shown how far I've come. And I'm like, I really should be getting into raids right now, I feel. And I think in a year I will be doing raids, because to me, yeah, like that's really a transformation. And just those moments where you can feel how far you've come, that's been my favorite moments of this year, I think. And then the fight case is just, I know that there's YouTubers that do fight case without taking a single point of damage, or with only 1 inventory slot, or silly challenges like that. And here I am, safe spotting every monster I can. But it was a big accomplishment for me.
Yeah, and I think what you're highlighting is, I'll say the acceptance of working around the system as we have it, because that's the way the Old School system has always been. And the reality of it is that I think that you can put that in a difficult to master but very rewarding category for that.
I think that moment in the fight case might have solidified, or might have been like the final nail in the coffin on me going back to RS3 anytime soon, because I can see why people might enjoy mastering that particular system, but I've always had to sort of butt my head against it, and it never really clicked for me. So, and here it does, and here I can sort of, I think it aligns better with how I express my skill. So for me, something clicked in that moment, and I've been progressing ever since, and
Yeah,
can't wait until wearing that Inferno cape.
And for me,
years, right?
And for me, complete opposite. I really need to sit down with you at some point, show you how I PVM on RS3, and figure out what the disconnect is between the both of us on that. And if I can learn anything from you on that, and if you can learn anything from me on what makes RS3 fun, we should do that at some point. Have like a cross-pollination session on that. But
maybe.
No, I think we definitely should. We will. As for me, I mentioned, of course, at the start that the thing that got me going on Old School was the idea of doing the Quest Point Cape, and hopefully based on the way the schedule is going, what's our current estimated ETA on that? I think we said something like April or May probably this year.
Yep.
If we're able to keep the schedule up once we get back in the new year from various things and RuneFest is done and all that. So that's the primary goal going forward for myself. And after that, I see myself falling into a routine of skilling on Old School. I don't see myself doing much combat after Questcape, if I'm being honest, with that. Because the thing that Leagues has taught me this year is that there's so much content in various areas related to the skilling aspect, whether it be farming, the Farming Guild, Giants Foundry, Guardians of the Rift, Temperos, in small quantities there, Asterisk, on that one, is that I would like to progress the skills beyond the Quest Point Cape level. And the reason I say that is because there's a lot of interesting and very well-designed pieces of content in Old School that come from the being added after 2015, when they decided that, okay, this is going to be our game. We're going to develop it in that manner, and we're going to, start adding meaningful content that provides new vehicles for people to level up. So that's where I see myself going with that. I don't see myself doing any PVM or combat after
okay,
Quest
but looking
Point
back at 2024, right? Like for me, it's really like it will always be the year of sort of like realization of what clicks and sort of making it work. If you in the future, if you look back on 2024, what will be sort of the main thing that you like? What milestone does this year represent in your overall Old School journey?
I think it goes back to what I said in the previous block in terms of unlocking all the requirements for Quest Point Cape. That's what this year was about for me.
Interesting.
Because we can do combat like Scurrius, we could do combat like the Moons and whatnot. I just didn't find it very rewarding, even though I learned it and found the mechanics interesting when it comes down to it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I land on all that, and why if you asked me if you were going to make a second Old School account, what would it be? It would probably be a skill peer.
I was about to say it would be a level 3 skiller, huh?
Yeah, it would. And the thing is, it's easier to play a skill peer, I think, in Old School than it is in RS3. Because if you play a skill peer in RS3, you don't have invention, you don't have prif, and you don't have the bulk of tools beyond level 70 for the gathering skills. Whereas that's not an issue in Old School.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, that's what I would make if I was making a second Old School character. Now, to tie it all together and close things out, the Old School RuneScape update episode of the year. What is our favorites? I'll actually start, since you've been starting for most of the show here. It's actually the While Gothic Sleeps episode. Is that surprising to you?
A little bit, yeah.
And here's why. Here's why.
Yeah, okay.
Or
yeah.
do you want to guess why?
No, I'm surprised because to me it was such a disappointing update. And like it felt like that made the show in a little bit of a minor. And I like it when we can have a show where, we can just talk about how everything clicks and how great everything is. And that, for While Graphic Sleep, that was definitely not the case. So
we started our SBNB update in 2005.
And it's a sentimental reason.
No, it's not sentimental. It's not. It's
nostalgia.
No, it's not. No, it's not. We started our SBNB update in 2005, and While Gothic Sleeps came out in 2008. And if I'm being 100% honest, we really did not hit our stride with our SBNB update until 2014, 2015. In terms of when we could say we really knew what we were doing, we really started producing content with thought. So While Gothic Sleeps and that episode for me was an opportunity to produce a podcast on a classic piece of RuneScape content, whether that be old school or RS3 related. And it did kind of fall flat on the old school side. I will give you that. But it was an opportunity like saying, here's a time machine, you get to go back in time and you get to redo this again. So for me, I chose this episode because it was a highlight on the podcast production side, in that whenever do you get an opportunity to redo something from when you didn't know what you were doing to when you know what you are doing?
I mean, to be honest, that's been all of Old School for me. I played the game.
I mean specifically making and producing the show.
I see.
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
That's why.
See.
Purely selfish reasons for that when it comes to producing podcasts.
Sure.
And now yours.
Now me. I feel I need to give like a little bit of background here and maybe a little bit of insight in how we do things. So I mean, we do a bunch of pre-production on these shows. We have our notes, especially in weeks with multiple pieces of content. We sort of talk through it. But we also think about, do we want to have a guest on, and do we want to make that work? And if so, like, what do we want to focus on with the guest? Do we want to keep it fairly open and classic, or do we want to give a little bit more space to the guests to tell their own story? And all of this, there always goes a whole bunch of work into this, and you can never really know whether it works or not until you are finished recording, which is really frustrating, because we've had episodes where afterwards we were like, that was not our best work. But the way your schedules work and the time investment necessary is you don't really go back and re-record it. Also because you would lose a lot of the spontaneity.
You lose the dynamicness of it. And that's always been one of my big things about making shows, is that you have to do it unscripted and you have to do it dynamic. Because if you're making content that is scripted and if you're going to hit certain beats, you might as well just make a YouTube video and make it 8 to 12 minutes long.
Exactly. So this was a very long preamble. I'm conscious of this. The reason why I want to explain all of this is that sometimes the opposite happens, and you do a show and it's just afterwards, like, you're in sort of a high at that point because it just flowed really well. You had great discussions. There was a good dynamic between all the people on board, and that happens very rarely. And I actually had to look back because I know I told this to you in text, and I actually looked this up. And it turns out that the one where I actually told you, like, hey, this was a really good episode, I enjoyed this, was the one where we did the League's theory crafting. Buckle up.
And the funny thing about that is, in the planning of the episode, you were leery of doing too much on-air theory crafting.
Yeah, I still, like, we had an episode a few weeks back where we talked about how theory crafting maybe is a bad thing for leagues, but at the same time, and maybe, I don't know if it was the theory crafting, but,
It's not. I wish I theory crafted better already.
But all in all, I think we just had a really good time, and I think we had Arcane on for that as well, and we all had interesting points, and I don't know, it just flowed really well. And for me, that's kind of the thing I'm chasing every episode, and having a moment where it all just comes together like that was very rewarding. So
yeah, I agree.
And on top of that, I think it was very, it showed the difference and the growth that we had compared to a year ago when we went into leagues not knowing what to expect, and now we do. And I think that's another reason I like the episode. It showed how much difference 1 year makes, both in terms of how we produce shows, but also in how we play the game and how we prepare for things like leagues.
No, yeah, I agree. And thinking about it, that's probably a close second to the Well, Gothic Sleeps episode. So for me, and like I mentioned, for purely selfish reasons on mine. So, but wow, that's a year. That's a year.
Yeah. Yeah, I just I'm gonna be a little bit, tiny bit sentimental here. I just want to say thank you for everybody who, stuck with us. It's looking at the content creation space around Old School. There's a lot of very talented people, talented in the game as well, doing all kinds of, crazy feats that, at least a year ago we couldn't even dream of. Right now, they're maybe plausible in the future. But you checking out, like, even if you've listened to just one episode, we really appreciate it. We really appreciate everybody who, commented, and especially those who decided to stick around and listen to more episodes. It's been great. I've been loving seeing your comments, and even if sometimes it is to tell me that I don't know what I'm doing, or I got things wrong, please keep doing that. We do take it on board.
Yeah, and I'll jump on that and piggyback off that and say that the most rewarding part of doing this show, aside from, like you said, hitting it out of the park when you've done that after an episode, is when you see the rewards for it, and people actually engage with the content, and they tell you one way or another, good or bad, that you did something well, or maybe there's a perspective that you missed. And that's the main thing that I always want us to strive for when we do one of these shows, is that we shouldn't just be talking to you guys out there listening. We should be talking with you guys. And I know the podcast format makes that a little bit difficult. But the Discord is always open. My DMs are always open. The friends chat is always open. The YouTube comments are always open. Let us know what you think. Let us know where you're at. Let us know what you think of the show. And if we did something right, if we did something wrong, let us know. Because that's what it's really all about, is just progressing this dialogue forward, and that's what OSRS Update should be, I think, a space for dialogue about the game. And if we've done one thing well this year, I would like to think it's that.
I agree.
So that pretty much brings us to the end of this episode, as we always do. As I mentioned at the top of the show, of course, we will be back for the game update arriving January 15th. So that means first episode of OSRS Update will be appearing in your feeds early on the 19th of January. So we got a couple weeks off there, but nonetheless, good podcast catch-up week. Go back, listen to some episodes that you might have missed throughout the rest of the year. Any final closing thoughts before we say goodbye for 2024?
No, again, thank you. It's really hard to put in words what this is, and again, like Shane said, if there's anything you want us to do in the new year, let us know, and we'll take it on board. We're always open for new ideas.
Indeedy dums, and with that, we'll see you guys in 2 weeks' time for another episode of OSRS Update. See you then, everyone. Take care.
Bye.